Gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Kelvin Droegemeier, who is the Vice President for Research and a Regents Professor of Meteorology at the University of Oklahoma. Dr. Droegemeier earned a Bachelor of Science with special distinction. Got to explain that to me sometime, Kelvin. In 1980 from the University of Oklahoma, and MS and PhD degrees in atmospheric sciences, both from the University of Illinois at Urbana. He joined the University of Oklahoma in 1985 as an assistant professor of meteorology, and as you well know, is a Regents professor there with distinction at that same institution. In 2004, among the many honors that Dr. Droegemeier has accumulated throughout his years here in Oklahoma, he was appointed by then-President George W. Bush to a 6-year term as a member of the National Science Board. That's the governing body of the National Science Foundation. He chaired the board's Committee on Programs and Plans and served on or chaired several task forces during that time. In 2010, Dr. Droegemeier was nominated by President Barack Obama for a second term on the National Science Board and was confirmed by the Senate in 2011. He's a fellow of the American Meteorological Society, a member of the Board of Directors of the Oak Ridge Associated Universities, and the Council on Governmental Relations. He served on the Advisory Committee for the Geosciences Directorate at NSF, and the NSF Advisory Committee for the Computer Information Science and Engineering Directorate. He is a national leader in the creation of partnerships among academia, government, and industry. He initiated and led a 3-year, $1 million partnership with American Airlines to customize weather prediction technology for commercial aviation. He led a $10.6 million research alliance with Williams Energy and Marketing and the trading company in Tulsa, which is the largest such partnership between a university and a private company. His research interests lie in thunderstorm dynamics and predictability, variational data simulation, mesoscale dynamics, computational fluid dynamics, massively parallel computing, and aviation weather. Today, Dr. Droegemeier is going to talk about energy research directions at the National Science Foundation. Please help me welcome Dr. Kelvin Droegemeier.
Thank you, Jim, very much. It really is a great pleasure to be here and share some thoughts with you as I bring up the PowerPoint here. I do have to confess that, as oftentimes happens when you're preparing a talk, I decided to change the title at the last minute, and Gina Miller was very gracious with this. There actually is a reason for me doing this. So first of all, I kind of wanted to give you my own thoughts about bioenergy research programs and various opportunities, including at NSF. But because I am a member of the National Science Board, as I got into preparing this talk and realized that if I were actually standing up here on behalf of the National Science Foundation, because the Science Board is part of the National Science Foundation, so I would be wearing an NSF hat up here, I thought it might sort of restrict the kinds of things that I wanted to share, especially giving some thoughts about EPSCoR in Oklahoma, because it then would have been an NSF talk. Now, Uma, who is following me, who's here somewhere, I believe, are you? There she is. So she'll talk more specifically about NSF opportunities, although I am going to say a few things about that. So the disclaimer, with all apologies, is that I am just giving you my personal views. I thought it would be interesting to look at this chart. I don't know if it's possible to dim the lights in here or not, if it's... Maybe not, because it's sort of an exhibit hall. But if you can see this, the brown color there, well, let me just, okay, perfect, thank you. This chart shows the horizontal axis is time, going from something I can't see on the far left to the year 2040. And the different colors indicate the fuel mix of the world, and the brown shows essentially biofuels, really at the time when people were burning wood way back when. So you can see that, you know, we went as a nation, in the world actually, not as a nation, but the entire world went from a fuel mix that was almost entirely biomass to one that is almost entirely everything but biomass. The colors that look like University of Texas burnt orange in there, and I can say that with care here, I think, at OSU, because none of us like the University of Texas, really. That color is the coal, and then the green is oil, the red is natural gas, and then the other sort of smaller fuels are up above there. And I just think it's very interesting to think about the fact that we did come from really more of a cellulosic type energy mix across the world, many centuries ago, up until the present time, where we're sort of trying to reverse that trend. We heard a lot of talk about sustainability this morning, and I think this graph is sort of relevant to that. Here on the left is the global population trends from 1960, 1980, 2000, and 2010, and then 2030, which is an estimate. The red color indicates the G7 countries, the so-called G7. You hear about the G7 summit, mainly the major powers of the world. Then the green represents basically everyone else, the rest of the world. And so if you look at, 2010, kind of surprisingly, and this goes back to the comment we heard from our colleague at Cornell University, it's amazing that 1.5 billion people in this world are still without electricity. And I loved what he said about sustainability. What, is your name Paul, right? Where are you? Huh? Larry, sorry. I sat next to him at dinner last night. You'd think I would remember. He made some really wonderful comments about sustainability really involving the entire notion of humanity in so many dimensions. And so it's kind of amazing there. You think about 1.5 billion people on the planet. Out of the roughly almost 7 billion people that are on the planet don't have electricity. Well, you look at the little bubbles there at the top, and I can't quite read the numbers from this angle, but 250 million barrels of oil is the need, and about 137 billion produced, so about 55% of the need. Fast forward to 2030, we're producing whatever that number is, 350 billion barrels of oil and gas equivalent, and that's roughly about half of the, little over half of the actual need that's out there. So it's kind of amazing if you look at how the population is growing. And again, I think what Larry said about sustainability is so true. You need to think of sustainability in the broad sense of sustaining the population and the quality of life and the economies of the world. Well, you look then at the energy mix, which is forecast to be present in 2030 by the fuel mixtures here, and there's a variety of sources. IEA really is the Information Energy Agency of the Department of Energy. These are various companies. British Petroleum is there, and ExxonMobil. And so they all kind of differ in some of the details of percentages from biomass and renewables and so on. But overall, it basically says that even 20 years from now, renewables are going to be a fairly small part of the energy mixture. And I think what's important here is to look at the demand that is over here in 2030 on the left and the actual estimates of how that demand will be met through the fuel mixture. And so really is a tough nut to crack. We heard that phrase this morning. I think we're seeing that here. Certainly we're going to see a transition toward these sustainable energy commodities, but really it's not going to happen overnight. I thought it'd be interesting before we talk about NSF to look a little bit at DOE. We heard from ARPA-E this morning, and this picture here, which is not my slide, it's got a lot of detail in it. My colleague Dan Arvizu on the National Science Board heads the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, was nice enough to send me this slide. Basically, of course, the biochemical conversion, the two major thrust areas, biochemical and thermochemical conversion. Our own EPSCoR project really focuses a lot on the lower part, at least at OU. I know my colleagues that are here do a lot in thermochemical conversion, and that's really been sort of the push over the last decade or so, either producing ethanol or ethanol and propanol and some of these other commodities. That's really what DOE's portfolio and push have been in. And I don't think you can read these, nor can I from up here, but basically this is the cost reduction. DOE set targets for really what the price point ought to be for this capability of cellulosic ethanol, which is roughly by this year it'd be $1.76 a gallon. And through a lot of innovation and research at DOE laboratories, DOE funding at universities, that price point is getting very close to being met. So there's some really good reason to be optimistic about where this is all headed. The real question is the capacity, as we heard this morning, the capacity to produce these fungible fuels with the energy density and the fungibility actually needed for modern society. A lot of demonstration plants out there. We heard about the tremendous activities going on in Colorado. Very, very exciting work. There's a lot of DOE demonstration plants around the country, and this map looks quite different than it did 30 years ago. So we've seen this obvious explosion, as we all know, and of course you see the technologies, the various technologies and the various feedstocks, as we heard earlier today, of corn stover and so on. The point I wanted to make, though, was really this next step of moving into the realm of non-ethanol fuels, where we're actually developing hydrocarbon fuels. We heard about some of that this morning in what's happening in Colorado. So really going directly through these various processes, which are quite complicated in their chemistries, to develop, basically drop-in fuels that really are much more of a similar nature to the hydrocarbons that we enjoy now from fossil energy. So that's sort of the DOE portfolio in a very, very, very short couple of slides. But I wanted to talk really mostly about NSF. Not so much about NSF policies, because at the National Science Board, and this is one of the reasons I decided to sort of shift the emphasis, the Science Board really hasn't set any sort of specific directions for energy research at NSF. We've done a lot of studies, we've looked at international research and so on. But it's interesting, as I was thinking about what I would say, that really this National Science Board hasn't really done anything much in the way of energy direction for NSF. Now, that's not a bad thing. In fact, if you look at NSF, and I show here the various directorates, there are 7 directorates at NSF plus some other offices, including the Office of Integrative Activities, which is where the EPSCoR program is located. But there's, of course, the Biology Directorate. There is a Directorate of Engineering, the Directorate of Geosciences, Math and Physical Sciences. What I want to say is that when you look at NSF overall and look for biofuels research, it's everywhere, including, and I'll make this point later, in the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate. The last panel before lunch, we talked a little bit about that, about the fact that this whole biofuels challenge is not just a physical science and engineering challenge. It's not a chemistry challenge. It's also got dimensions of human behavior, policy, political science, and these other things. The nice thing about NSF is, as an organization, it funds, very much mirroring universities, the way its programs are set up, it actually funds basically research and basic research in all of those areas. So one of the points I want to make today is that when we look at the biofuels problem, whether it's cellulosic, whether it's whatever, thermocatalytical, whatever we're talking about, NSF is a wonderful home for research in the basic sciences, but also integrating into the other domains which affect biofuels research so strongly. So just looking at a few numbers, my colleague Tom Peterson, who's the Assistant Director of NSF for Engineering, gave me this slide. This is basically the Directorate, the Engineering Directorate's Clean Energy Current Awards. And at the very bottom, the biggest part of the portfolio you can see there is biofuels and bioenergy. $20.2 million. Now, engineering is a very, very large directorate. Okay, so this is $20.2 million doesn't seem like a lot of money, and in fact, it's not. Although NSF is a $7.5 billion agency, $20.2 million is not a lot of money. The primary awards that this directorate makes, and you see up there $65.6 million in primary awards. What they mean by that is that these are awards that are made with the primary focus on the topics that you see there, whether it's solar, fuels, or whatever. So the point to be made here, and this does not include the EPSCoR programs, by the way, is that the Engineering Directorate is currently investing a substantial amount of its $65.6 million in the clean energy arena on biofuels and bioenergy. So certainly there's a lot more work that needs to be done, and NSF obviously is a home for that. Now, if you kind of aggregate this up just a little bit more and look at the so-called clusters here, okay, it's basically looking at the same data that we had before. The primary awards shown in dark blue, you look at things like transportation thermal fluids, the second second thing down there. So primary awards are actually smaller than the secondary awards. And the message here is that some of this basic research and these grant proposals that get funded spin out into secondary areas, okay? Either involving, in some cases, directly the kinds of research that is being done in the primary area, but also in many cases extending beyond that, and even involving collaborators from other areas. So chemical, biochemical, and biotechnology systems, the third bar down. And then environmental engineering sustainability is really the biggest part of that portfolio, the way NSF counts it when you look at the the cluster approach in terms of how they aggregate this stuff. So down at the bottom, I think is an important point here. This represents 22% of the active awards and 14% of the entire portfolio in engineering. So that's, I think, a very substantial investment in this type of energy research. And you see $94.8 million in active awards as of about, what is that, about a year ago or so. So NSF is really doing a lot in this arena. That's the bottom line. And certainly DOE is doing an enormous amount, but I just want to make sure folks realize that apart from EPSCoR, NSF does have very heavy investments in this arena. I wanted to mention one program in particular, and I'll mention a few other ones here. One thing in engineering is called EFRI, the Emerging Frontiers in Research and Innovation. It's run by a program manager I know fairly well because he's serving as a kind of a liaison person to the National Science Board. His name is Sohi Rastagari. Some of you might want to get to know. The EFRI program is very, very interesting because it's very much a bottom-up program like all of NSF, but it is a place where mid-scale ideas in particular are funded, and they really try to fund things on the innovative frontier and the bleeding edge of research, and including potentially transformative research. So this is a place, and of course NSF overall is that way, but this is a place in particular that uses very innovative programmatic techniques to encourage PIs to submit big ideas and to get behind them and fund them. So you can see here the portfolio mix. These are just some things that Sohi gave me to show you. But you can see it really hits the focal point of a lot of the work that is going on that we heard about this morning that we'll see at our student poster session this afternoon. So I really would encourage you in this particular thing called Hydrocarbons from Biomass Project, reflecting that slide I showed you from DOE, that this direct production of hydrocarbon type fuels is very important for the future. NSF is really focusing a lot on that through the EFRI program. And so he gave me this slide as well, just saying that the focus for 2012, you can see there some of the specific things they're looking at, photosynthetic biorefineries, getting into things like algal fuels and so on and so forth. But even though they have topic areas, they're still open to other ideas that you might wish to submit. So I really would encourage you to think about the EFRI program. If you don't know about it, go to the website, just go to NSF and Google EFRI. And one of the important things you see there is that they also engage external partners. Air Force Office of Scientific Research, of course, because the Air Force, among all the federal agencies, especially within DOD, is very, very big on alternative sources of energy. And of course, things like jet fuel, a big deal to the Air Force. They have targets, and I forget exactly what they are, but in the next, maybe 2 decades, that the military and the Air Force in particular would be something like half fueled by non-hydrocarbon fuel. So that is a very, very big push in this country within the military. So just a real quick point there on EFRI. I just wanted to highlight that program. Now there are another set of programs that I wanted to highlight here, and we heard about the EPSCoR program, so I won't say a whole lot about that. We heard about that in the last discussion session. I'm so glad that my colleague from NSF brought that up because it is a brand new program. And she told you all the details of the program and did so extremely well, so I won't even try to do that because she knows a lot about it. But one of the things I wanted to highlight for you was the fact that this program exists at all. Okay, apart from the details of the program, which are very important. But the fact that NSF went out to the Kauffman Foundation, the Deshpande Foundation, and created this program, $50,000 per award, as you heard, but that NSF is kind of saying, we don't just want to be funding basic scientific research. We're going to get into the business of looking at the viability of research in terms of technology development and that sort of thing, in terms of even creating jobs. That's very unusual, and it's a slippery slope that I think a lot of people would be nervous that NSF is getting on. But let me tell you, it's not a slippery slope. It's exactly what NSF should be doing as the nation's premier basic science agency, in addition to NIST and the DOE Department of Science, to actually be saying, we do basic research and we fund that, but we also need to be dipping our toe into the water of innovation. So this EPSCoR notion, which was created by NSF's director, Subir Suresh, is a brilliant thing. It's absolutely a brilliant thing, but it's not a very big program. Not yet. It's a few $1 million, as you heard earlier. But it's something I think is going to grow. So I really want to just call your attention to the significance of the fact that that program exists at NSF. Very, very important. change of direction by NSF, I would say, not to forsake all of what it's done for the last 60 years of its existence, but to say that it's sort of moving slightly in a direction here that is sort of a translational domain of evaluating research outcomes to see what potential they have for innovation and creation of wealth in terms of jobs in the private sector. So I think that's really terrific. IGERT, you're probably familiar with that, a program to really look at crossing boundaries of research disciplines and focusing on graduate education, very important. Science, Engineering, and Education for Sustainability, the CEASE program, is a very large program. It's a several $100 million program at NSF, and so when you look at that and you say, what direction is NSF headed in? They're headed in the direction the community says they need to be headed in, because NSF is not a top-down organization. It listens to the community through a series of workshops and things that are held out there, through things like this meeting, where information is taken back to NSF, and eventually you'll see it develop into programs. So CEASE is a program, if you're marginally familiar with it, I would really encourage you to go look at that program. It's really very much in the crosshairs of the kinds of things that you're talking and hearing about today. Inspire, another, Subra loves these acronyms, and they're really terrific as you get to know him as the director of NSF. He's a phenomenal guy, former dean of engineering at MIT. And he just started, he's been at NSF for about a year now, and he's just doing an incredible job. But this Inspire program basically is this notion of integrative research, interdisciplinary research and education across the entire foundation. And he's come up with this idea called One NSF that says we want to operate as a singular organization, whether it crosses directorates, divisions, programs, whatever. We want NSF to be sort of this singular thing, no longer a stovepipe organization. We're going to continue to have the directorates, but we're going to operate as if these directorates, and as they are now, much more porous and integrative. So this Inspire program, the word is not an accident. It's to inspire people to think big, to think beyond the boundaries of their own traditional disciplines. And NSF, through that program, is saying we welcome those ideas. We have structures set up to where we know how to review proposals that are highly interdisciplinary, that might involve linkages with industry or whatever. Very, very important program. A couple other things just to highlight. Of course, STEM education, very important. And I asked a question this morning in the earlier session about workforce development, because that's extremely important in these areas of energy, of large data, and so on. We can think about the importance of these kinds of research programs and problems, but the question is, are we educating the next generation of workforce? Are we creating a diverse workforce? Because we're going to become a much more diverse country in 30 years. We'll become a majority of minorities, as people say. So if we're not bringing underrepresented groups into the science and engineering and mathematics disciplines now, we're going to have a real problem in just a short period of time. So STEM education is extremely important, and one of the important things, especially about EPSCoR, is it builds capacity. So here in Oklahoma, we're building capacity not only in research, but also in education. So for you students that are here, think about what you're going to be doing as you get into the career workforce. Be thinking about the courses you're taking, the experience you're getting in doing the research, the posters you're presenting today. We need to be very sensitive and understand how to make sure to meet the need for the future. There's another major effort out there, this it's called the Advanced Manufacturing Partnership. It's been rolled out recently. A lot of folks have been talking about this. If you were in the sessions this morning, you heard about, in Rentec and places like that, where manufacturing is extremely important. Do you include biofuels in manufacturing? Absolutely. And what manufacturing for the future is very, very rapid prototyping. 6 months from idea to product. Okay, and so you think about the biofuels, problem and how we're able to, take research and spin it up into, say, TRL level 1 or 2 or 3 capabilities, and then get to TRL 6, 8, and 7, some of those things where we're actually being able to bring this stuff to scale. Manufacturing is incredibly important. So here's another national initiative, a multi-billion-dollar initiative eventually that has been created that we really need to pay attention to in the biofuels community. And finally, another program at NSF, the Research Coordination Networks. This is quite a bit more upstream, where you're saying, I know that as a person who studies, catalysis or some particular thing, I need to hook up with other people. I need to build a network maybe in my own discipline or beyond the boundaries of my own discipline. This Research Coordination Network program at NSF provides some nominal funding to help you actually do that. So one of the challenges we always have as scholars when we're crossing disciplinary boundaries is, how do I find the people out there who I know I need to be working with, but I don't know who they are, I don't even know where they are, and I'm not exactly sure if I saw them that I would know that they're relevant to my research program. So the RCN is something you really might want to look at. Finally, and I think the next speaker will certainly touch on this, there's a lot of specific announcements of opportunity in the energy, biofuels, bioenergy areas at NSF. You can get on the website and just type in the word energy or biofuels, and you'll see all kinds of things here. And the main point I wanted to make here, and in fact one of my colleagues at OU just submitted this Centers for Chemical Innovation proposal. NSF has a lot of program announcements that they put out that have very specific titles, very specific expectations, and so on. But also don't forget the unsolicited proposal mechanism, which is roughly 80% of NSF's portfolio, are proposals that people just submit with ideas and on whatever they want to study, and they get reviewed and in a lot of cases funded. So think about the programs that are maybe specifically targeted toward what you want to do. Go look at what has been funded in NSF, because all of the funded proposals are actually on the website. See what the trends have been, see what NSF is funding these days, and then certainly talk to a program officer about your idea and how it might fit in. Final point I wanted to make was what is out there in renewable energy beyond what Oklahoma EPSCoR is doing in the EPSCoR community. Jim showed this graph this morning that shows all of the EPSCoR jurisdictions. Or Jerry, I guess, showed it. We have now 30 or 31. Oh, sorry, it's on the left there. Oklahoma, there are three sort of foci that I could find at the state level in EPSCoR states. Oklahoma in cellulosic bioenergy, Iowa, which is brand new EPSCoR state, just continuing to find its way, looking at renewable energy, but they're kind of looking more broadly at wind, bio, renewables, and also bringing in a very important policy dimension. And then finally, Kansas has some work going in renewable energy, but they're focusing a lot on climate change in the context of energy, which of course gets into water, sustainability, and so on. So the last slide I wanted to leave you with was something that I feel is very important to keep in mind, and it's something that we talked a little bit about this morning. And that is that bioenergy is not just a physical science and engineering challenge. A lot of disciplines really need to be engaged. And if you heard the talks this morning, you got a sense of the breadth. I think Larry brought this up in the panel session about how all-encompassing this problem is. It's very challenging. NSF is really a unique organization because it has all these different divisions and directorates, including a directorate of socio-behavioral and economic research. So for example, economics and finance are extremely important, obviously, to this problem. Now, engineers study supply chain management. They study a lot of aspects of this problem. But as we heard in the panel, and is very true, I know at my own university, a lot of the challenges in engineering, in energy, even in fossil fuels, not only just things like horizontal drilling and fracking, those engineering problems, but the business and finance and economics of energy. People like Aubrey McClendon of Chesapeake Energy and the folks at Devon and Sandridge and all these companies in Oklahoma, they're looking a lot at the financial dimensions of the marketplace. That's how they make a lot of their decisions. The technology is important, but let's not forget about the business side. Again, NSF has social behavioral economic sciences. Economic sciences means business. Public opinion and human behavior. How many of you go around looking for gas stations and you see big signs that say no ethanol, 100% gas? It's very interesting, the public reaction to renewable energy. And there are folks in political science and anthropology and social science and sociology who study human behavior. And that's a very important part. How is the community going to react? How are the markets, as Larry said, we got to think about markets. We're a market-driven nation. How are they going to react? How are they going to adapt? If we roll out all kinds of new cars and stuff and people don't buy them, well, that's not a good thing. You remember the Yucca Mountain sort of fiasco in terms of storing nuclear materials in Yucca Mountain? Turns out there was never any real study done of people's perceptions of Yucca Mountain. Some of my colleagues at OU, and I give that example because I'm familiar with it, have studied the whole thing with Yucca Mountain, and it turns out that if that study had been done 20 years ago, it might have been a completely different outcome. But Yucca Mountain was not looked at from the social sciences point of view. And I'm not a social scientist, I'm a physical scientist. But I can tell you in working with social scientists that a lot of the challenges that we have in the physical science and engineering disciplines are such that we're going to run up against a brick wall continually if we don't learn how to engage these other disciplines. In my own field, 550 people are dead last year in tornadoes. That's incredible when you think about the amazing technology we have in this country, the models, the radars. Here in Oklahoma, you saw it in Alabama, all these, in Tuscaloosa, a lot of people died. What in the world is going on? What is going on is the fact that meteorologists have sort of thought of the atmosphere, as equations, as fluid dynamics, as physical science, and turns out we're now realizing that we can't save lives until we start engaging. We can't save lives effectively as much as we want to until we start studying how people behave in stressful situations where they're about to, a tornado's about to hit their house, or they're about to be evacuated due to a hurricane or whatever. We've got to engage those sorts of disciplines. We also have to understand the economics, how decisions are made, the cost to evacuate, extremely expensive, the politics. These problems are not simple, and the panel, I think, said it beautifully today. Bioenergy is not a simple problem. And in fact, if you think about it, probably the physical science and the chemistry and the engineering parts of it are probably the simplest part of it. The toughest part is people. People are complicated, right? Equations are pretty nice and neat, but people are complicated. So we really have to think about these other dimensions. NSF is a fabulous place to get that kind of research funded. And just some of the other things I mentioned, and finally, their ethics. Okay, we saw that with food stocks, right? And the production of foods and using it for biofuels. Well, we didn't really sort of think about that carefully before the whole thing was the cows are out of the barn, and oh my gosh, now there's this issue. Public perception was you're using corn, you're starving people. Well, I talked to Dan Arvizu at NREL, and he said that's not true at all, back then. Public perception was that it was true, okay? Well, we've got to engage other folks in the conversation. We have to think as scholars, researchers beyond our own disciplinary boundaries to realize that these problems are not nice and simple, as the panel beautifully said this morning. They're very complicated, they're very messy. But that's why we as academics at universities, that's why folks at private companies, why we're all working together. Because if it was easy, it would have already been done. If it was easy, we wouldn't want to do it. Okay? We like tough problems. We like to be challenged. And that's the beauty of us and this nation, is that we can pull together, we can solve these things, but it's not going to be easy. So I really encourage you, as you think about moving forward, especially you students that are here, and you go out into the professoriate, you go out into working in the private sector, you go out working for DOE laboratories, keep in mind to avoid being myopic in your view of these kinds of problems, making sure that you have a very broad view of these problems. You yourself may not become a social scientist, but understand the importance of engaging with them, working with them, learning how to speak their language, because they speak a very different language. People in the business sector speak a very different language. But it is so incredibly fabulous and wonderful to start working with them and realize they expand your own intellectual horizons. They teach you how to think. As a physical scientist, I've learned how to think completely differently now that I've talked to and I work with social scientists. And I never would have done that had I kept talking to the same folks day after day who are meteorologists as well. Because as we all know, they're not very smart anyway, right? I mean, if that was the case, we could predict the weather, I think, pretty good. So anyway, thank you all very much. I would just end, I guess there was one more slide here. Something, again, I would encourage us to do in Oklahoma is to think across jurisdictional lines. You look at Kansas, you look at Iowa, you look at some of the places that are doing a lot of work. We're doing some fabulous stuff in EPSCoR, but I think if we think a little bit more beyond the boundaries of our state and say, who could we really engage with, bringing in the social sciences, bringing in more workforce development, pushing on STEM education, I think we could put together really an amazing regional effort based on bioenergy that would really be something that would move the nation forward. And I think, frankly, as EPSCoR states, we have the agility and the resources and the spirit to do that kind of thing. So that's kind of a challenge I'd just like to leave us with as you think about the poster session this afternoon, talk with students. What is next for Oklahoma? That's something we always need to think about, and this is something we might want to consider. So thanks very much. I appreciate your time.